Hello everyone, welcome to today's video. Slightly different to what I usually post. In this one I'm going to show you how to change the rear brake pads and discs on a car that has an electronic parking brake. This car is my own. It's a 2018 Skoda Superb 2-litre turbo diesel. So let's get started. To change the rear pads and discs on a car that has an electronic parking brake, you're going to have to get yourself a diagnostic scanner or a fault code reader that gives you that option and is compatible with your car. I've got an Ansel VD500 that's suitable for cars that are in the Volkswagen range, your Skodas, Audis, Seats, and of course Volkswagen. So the first task is to jack the car up and place axle stands under the rear wishbones of both rear wheels. Remember to use axle stands and don't rely on the car jack to support the weight of the car. The next step is to plug in your vehicle diagnostic machine into your car, which in this model is underneath the steering wheel. It'll automatically turn on to main menu. Next you want to go to VA Diagnostics, and at the bottom you'll see electronic parking brake replacement brake pads. Press OK on that and then you'll see certain preconditions that you must do first. Number 1, turn on the ignition switch, but number 2 is don't start the car. Once you've done that, the third step is to release the handbrake. Just put your foot on the foot brake and press the brake button. Once you've disengaged the parking brake and all the preconditions have been done, press the enter button and that will allow your diagnostic machine to connect with your car. This will take a minute, so just wait, and once it's connected, a screen will appear saying press replacement brake pads. Press that and you'll hear the motors on your rear calipers winding down. Some warning lights will appear on your dashboard as this is happening. Just ignore them. Once that's completed, it'll ask you to press enter and press that. It'll then give you some more preconditions. One of them is to turn the ignition off. Turn the ignition off and then press the enter button again. Now it's time to replace your brake pads and discs. The first step is to remove your wheel, and once you take the wheel off, the best thing I do is put the wheel underneath the car so it's no longer a tripping hazard. There are 3 things we need to remove in order to separate the piston housing from the pad housing. The first is the brake caliper spring. To do that, just use a flat level screwdriver and wedge it in between the spring and your piston housing and just wiggle it around and it should come loose. Next we have to remove the 2 bolts that connect the piston housing and the pad housing together. It's protected by dust cover caps, so remove them first. Now we have to loosen the 2 bolts that connect the piston housing and the pad housing together. I've actually fast forwarded this video as it is quite time consuming, and I had to alternate between a 7mm hex bolt and an Allen key just because there is limited space to do this job. But just take your time. Once you've retracted those bolts all the way back, use a plain screwdriver to lever the piston housing off the pad housing. Once you move that all the way back, you can get access to the old brake pads, and then you can just remove them from the padding housing. The next step is to remove the screw that holds the brake disc to the rear hub. Once you've done that, you can remove the brake disc. If it's a wee bit stubborn, give it a wee tap with the hammer and it should come free. Before we put on the new pads and discs, give the pad housing and the surrounding area a good clean with a wire brush. However, remember to wear a face mask and do this task in a well ventilated area. The next thing we have to do is move the piston as far back as possible to make way for the new pads and discs. Now it's time to put on the brake disc, but before you do that, use brake cleaner to clean both sides of the brake disc in order to remove any grease that was on it. At this stage now we're more or less reversing what we did previously. Put the new rear brake disc onto the rear hub and line it up with all the holes, including that wee small screw from earlier. Another tip that you can do for this is put some copper grease on the tip of the screw. That way it'd be easier to take off the next time you have to replace the brake discs. After you've done that, if there's any dirt or grease on the disc, just wipe it off with the brake cleaner. So here are the new brake pads, but before we put them in place, we want to put copper grease on the areas where it makes contact with the pad housing and the piston. Once we've prepared the brake pads, place them into the pad housing, and once we've done that, place the piston housing, wrap around them, and while we're done that, make sure you've not got any grease on the discs. If you have, just wipe it clean. With the piston caliper in position, the next step is to tighten up the two bolts at the back. Be careful with these, make sure they're lined up perfectly, and try and tighten them up finger tight, as you don't want to risk threading them. Just tighten them up, and once they're tight, you put the two dust caps on it. And for the last piece of this bit, we can put the caliper spring back on. Just put it into the wee holes, lever it onto the bar, and give it a wee tap with a hammer just to make it sure it's in place. Now that you have everything built up, the next step is to go into your car and press the foot brake multiple times. That will push the brake pads up against the brake disc. Then go out, back, check it all over, make sure the disc can actually turn without obviously not pressing the foot brake, and just give it another clean once over. And that's it. That's how you change the brake pads and discs. Before we can adjust the parking brake, of course, we have to do the other side. You always do both sides on the car. So just repeat what you've done in the first part of this video, and then when you've done that, we can then adjust the electronic parking brake. To adjust the electronic parking brake, we need to go back to your full code reader. Press enter, and it's going to ask you to check that you've done the brake pads. Press enter again, and then it's going to ask you to turn your ignition on. Turn your ignition on, then press enter again, and then your full code reader will connect with your car, and then you'll actually hear the motors on your rear calipers adjusting back and forth. Once it's completed that task, it'll come up on your full code reader that it's completed the task. It'll probably ask you then to turn your parking brake off, so you press your foot brake and then press your button so your parking brake is off. Press enter again, and it'll say it's completed the task and that any fault lights will be normal. Once you've checked everything over and you're satisfied with your work, you can now put your wheels back on. Remember to tighten them up to the appropriate torque setting, and this is something you should do regularly. Check your wheels and make sure they're nice and tight. And that's it. That's how you change the rear brake pads and discs on a car that has an electronic parking brake. Hope you enjoyed the video. I'm planning to make more videos like this. If you have any comments, please leave them on the bottom. And goodbye.